Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this final conversation for our TDO Connections program. My name is Quodesia D Johnson, and I have the honor of being your moderator for today's conversation, as well as the company culture advisor for the Dallas Opera. In good Dallas Opera fashion and in solidarity with the way that we practice truth-telling, I would like to begin this panel discussion with the Dallas Opera's Land and People Acknowledgement. The Dallas Opera is committed to creating belonging in opera, and that includes the narratives we share about this land and the people. We are on the original land of the Caddo, Wichita, and Comanche sovereign nations, nations of people who cultivated the land since time immemorial, and who also faced horrible treatment and conditions and policy that allowed for forceful removal by any means necessary. We also acknowledge that people were stolen from their homes off the coast of Africa and brought here and forced into free and enslaved labor. Now, we share this not to place blame. These are things that we have all inherited. But along with that inheritance comes the honor, comes a responsibility, and comes the opportunity to speak truth and how we tell the stories of this land and the people, and to practice holistic celebration. Thank you for joining us for this land and people acknowledgement. And with this, as I said, we have this conversation taking place this year in TDO Connections programming. We focused on the leadership, the creativity, and the representation of women in the arts. In particular, today's conversation will be about women in opera. We have two amazing guests joining us today. I cannot do them justice, and I love to allow people to share who they are themselves. Of course, we have bios and things that we can check out, but I'm going to ask Madison and Francis, can you let us know who you are? Tell us a bit more about your work and what brought you to opera. We'll begin with Madison.
Hi, everyone. I'm Madison Leonard here. I'm actually a native Texan, and whenever I'm working with Dallas or other, I feel like I need to be very upfront about that. So I was born in just outside Dallas, Texas, grew up in Idaho, and meandered through music as a child, did a lot of performing, learning of instruments, just for fun. It wasn't until college at Pepperdine University in California where I had a wonderful voice teacher who heard a potential in my voice and said, "Do you know about opera?" And of course, all I knew about opera was those loud people, right, who don't use microphones. I think I went to a field trip once of Madame Butterfly as a kid. So that was all I knew about opera. He introduced me to what it sounded like, what it felt like. He was sending me YouTube links to, here's Beverly Sills, here's Maria Callas, all these people who were new to me. And I caught the bug definitely in college. I went on to pursue a graduate degree in voice at Northwestern in Illinois. And since then, I've been training and traveling and working as a singer. I feel very fortunate to be able to do this work. It's challenging and complicated, as we are going to discuss, especially as a woman, but I love the work. I feel blessed to be able to do it. To meet the wonderful people I get to work with is the highlight of my work. And home for me now is in Utah with my husband, also a singer, baritone Shay Owens. He is Professor Owens now, as he's the director of opera at Brigham Young University. So that's where we call home. We have a little 18-month-old boy who is the center of our universe. He's already learned to clap and say, "Ooh," whenever we finish practicing. So we've got a built-in audience, and we love to travel together and to work together like we are this summer in Central City, Colorado. We open our production of Romeo and Juliet tomorrow. So that's a little bit about me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for joining us for this panel discussion. So very excited. Francis, same request. Let us know who you are. Tell us a bit about your work and what brought you to opera.
Hello, everyone. My name is Francis. My pronouns are she, her. I am an opera director at Dallas Opera. I was an assistant director, and I view my work as a director as like creating the world where the characters' behaviors given to us in the score and the text make sense. So I provide the context for those behaviors and develop that world visually and tactilely for the performers. And I'll outside of directing, I'm active in my union leadership, and I also do fights and intimacy and movement, and doing a lot of advocacy in those areas. Oh, what brought me to opera?
Yes.
Opera appealed to me when I learned about it. I was like young and secretly up past my bedtime watching TV in the playroom, and I was flipping channels, and we didn't have cable. So what I was watching was public PBS, and they were showing Marriage of Figaro, and I came in on the very last act, and I had no idea what was going on, but everybody had a lot of fun costumes, and there was definitely like people dressed up as each other. I got that much. And I was like, this is awesome. There's like everyone has a lot of big feelings and they're singing about it and they get to wear fun costumes. And I want to be a part of that. So that's what pulled me in.
Beautiful. I love this. The shaping of worlds. Very, very much. This is me paraphrasing, of course. Because so often we talk about in opera that we are creating worlds, or we're replicating worlds, or we're representing worlds, and we're inviting everyone into this space to engage in this story, in this snapshot of humanity in so many ways. So I very much appreciate having someone who shapes worlds and someone who communicates those worlds between director and artist. So I'm excited for this conversation. As you can see, I'd like to begin with the description that we have for our TDO connections. This year, for this particular programming, we opened with a bit of a description of what it means. So we presented Rigoletto, we presented Hansel and Gretel, we presented Das Rheingold and Cosi, of course. We introduced the season's TDO connections content by noting that the women in these operas are courageous, intelligent, dismissed, objectified, joyous, and powerful. All of those things and so much more. These are some of the things that we kind of highlighted when we looked at the female characters or the women in these stories. I'd like to ask, do any of these words resonate with you? What are your thoughts about those descriptors for our characters this year? Go for it, Frances.
Okay. I think the word dismissed stood out to me, especially because I worked on Cosi, and so many opera professionals and opera artists of many, like across, in front of the audience, behind the audience, or behind the stage, dismiss Cosi as an opera as like unsavable. It's too long, it's too boring, it's too misogynistic. And Cosi is one of those where like I understand where people are coming from, but that drives me to find the version that works. It's so funny because I think that's not every opera that's dismissed for me. Like some operas I'm like, I could, that's a pass. But Cosi was one where I was like, yeah, let's get into it. Let's see what's there. And Madison, I know you worked on a Cosi recently. Do you feel that from other opera singers where they're like, oh, Cosi?
Absolutely. And honestly, I have to admit a little bit myself. Like I was going into it like, well, at least I get to be Despina and she knows some things. But we had a wonderful director as well. And she really highlighted ways to still respect the plot, respect the score, but infuse the characters with a lot more understanding of the context and more wisdom, more just not as single faceted. So I think there are so many ways to do that from a director standpoint and from a performer standpoint to say, okay, let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's peel back some layers of this onion and see what we can add to this thing that's already been kind of baked for us. But there's a lot that you can do to it, I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And I think it also begs the question of what else is underneath this particular work being dismissed? What else is underneath the women in this particular opera being dismissed? One of the conversations we had with staff was the fact that so many of these operas are female-centered in a way. It's male, the perspective is male-centered, but it's kind of female-driven in so many ways. And Mozart does a beautiful job in so many ways of providing agency for those characters who are normally having to be more submissive, the servant, the women, the ones who are considered to be less intelligent. There's always this ploy, if you will. There's always this plot and this thing against those who are assumed to have power. And we did not miss that when it comes to Kosi as well.
Well, I think it's really interesting what you just said of like, and this is something I find in opera, and I have to balance it like these composers, by focusing on these women characters and giving them arias, they are giving the characters a chance to connect with the audience and to be multifaceted humans.
Mm-hmm.
But also they still might not fit our standard of respected humanity.
Yes.
So it's like the composers are doing something, but it's usually not quite far enough for us today. Like Fiordiligi gets a giant aria or to talk about how conflicted she is and what does she want and what does she need and what does she have and what does she not have. And it's still like not enough to make us feel like, she's complete.
Yes.
And the question is like, did Mozart and Da Ponte do it that way on purpose, or is that like a lack that we feel today? And that's something I really think about. And I think this goes like for Rigoletto too, Madison, where like Gilda is humanized in so many ways, even though she does some things that are like seen as very not good.
Yes.
But and Verdi, I think, is really good at this with his female characters, you know, Violetta and Lady Macbeth, of like making them very human and giving them inner rich complexities, but it often still doesn't feel like enough.
That's true.
And I think that's a beautiful point, because one of my questions surely is the way in which we navigate context. One of the things that we looked at last year in particular for TDO Connections is representation. And representation, knowing that representation matters, but how you're represented matters as well. So to continuously have women characters and to continuously have people represented in stories, but they're continuously only this thing, only this person, only serving as this plot point, and then going forward. So providing additional context of, well, what did that do at the time? Because mind you, this is over a century old. This is not our era, very much so, in what it means to be 2023. So providing that additional context is necessary. How do you navigate weighing the balance? I'll ask this for both of you. Madison first, how do you navigate weighing the balance of performing a role of someone who did not have as much agency the same way as we do now, or as we expect to have in today's society?
Yeah, great question. I sing Gilda a lot in Rigoletto, and man, it's one that can be so easily dismissed and put in this little box of innocent, naive, young, little angel purity. Poor thing, she just gets, totally taken advantage of and makes this terrible decision. And that's one way to do it. That's probably a story that's been told many, many times. It bores me to death. So I choose differently, because she is a complicated human being with conflicting, opposing emotions and ideas. So sometimes we have allies as performers and directors who also take that same approach. Sometimes you don't. That's the reality of our positions. So I usually try to infuse it with more complexity. But that's the problem. What you're saying, Guo, is that especially my voice type often gets put in this box of young, pure maiden, doesn't know anything, which
objects
is right, objects whose only power is often in their sexuality and the taking of whatever purity that they have.
A very specific brand of sexuality. Yeah.
Very specific brand, exactly. And a certain amount of the things that I just mentioned are in the plot, are in the score, are in the original material. And you can respect that at the same time as recognizing that there's more to this human being, and you can reflect that on stage in clever ways. But it is frustrating for me to continuously keep playing these characters that, that's all that was written for them. And maybe they do have an aria. I mean, even Juliet, right, that I'm singing this week, I just want to see the world. And then the first thing that she sees, blah, blah, blah. We know how the story ends. But that's what I want to see about operas that are being written now and in the future. Of course, this is the context that we have. This is all of the literature that we've all been raised. Many of us have been raised reading, but we can do more. So it saddens me and disappoints me when I see modern operas that don't have complicated women characters, because I'm saying, what are we doing?
Or they have one woman character and you're like, it's marriage figure, like 5 male characters and 1 female character. I'm like, what's
Exactly.
happening?
I know, I'm like, I'm sorry, have you been to a music school or conservatory? Because your ratio is really off.
Your ratio is really off.
Yes, if composers really want schools to perform their works, you need to be writing predominantly soprano operas.
Exactly.
And I love this because in speaking about the very limited time that we have with these characters, one, we have a limited time with all of the characters anyway, because we are kind of dropping into the middle of a story in opera many times. Something has already happened, and that's life. Something has already happened. Something's going to happen later. This is where we are as we get to this big conflict that all of these characters are kind of centered around. And we may not be able to spend as much time with the women in some of these operas. In particular, this year, as we're looking at these stories, when we do spend time with them, what are we hearing from them? What are we assuming about them? What other additional information can we kind of start to gain, which I think provides us with the opportunity to dig a bit deeper about the rest of the story. The staff, we looked at Electra coming up in particular. So many times our female leads, right? Our mother is depicted as just this evil woman who killed her husband and who married a cousin, and shame on her. And Electra is out for revenge. All Electra and her brother, right? They're out for revenge. When we pull back a bit more and see this person as a human being, what must we be facing? What conditions could we be in to respond that way? Dig a little deeper. Oh, her husband killed their daughter and lied about it just so he could make it to Troy after he did something he wasn't supposed to be doing.
It's the whole Troy kind of sketchy to begin with, right? Like
right.
The whole concept, like everybody go fight for this
let's
one
start
woman.
with that, right? Everybody's gonna go and then we see, oh, this is a grieving mother. Oh, this is right. So we have all of these additional ways. It does not dismiss or support her decision. Her decision is her decision. But suddenly we start to add layer and context to these characters. We do the same with Gilda. Here she is in a specific situation where she's been kind of sheltered from the world. She truly has been, in what we understand. And she meets someone who is kind, whether he is honest about it or not. In the decisions that were made for her, this is the world that she has. This is the understanding of the world that she has. Here's someone who is kind. And here she is making a decision based on her own will, based on everything else that she's experienced. We get to see some of the courage of these characters. We get to see the humanity of the characters. And yes, the tragedy that befalls a lot of our characters. But also when we look at Cosi, we get to see the intelligence of the characters because they've been placed in a situation based on the insecurities of their partners. All of these things start to happen. So in so many ways, the way that we view these works comes with a lens from 2023, a lens from this century that could resonate with the lens from the time it was created. And sometimes that resonance is not happening. So we get to navigate what happens in between. I think about these words that we've shared. And of course, we all know women who do something similar, do something different. I'd like to ask you, are there women in your lives? Are there people in your lives who inspire you to do your work?
Go ahead, Frances.
Okay. I was thinking about this one because I've been inspired very recently. I've had some free time this summer and I've gotten really into like handicrafts. I'm a vintage sewing machine person now. I have 2 of them. And I've been really inspired by this idea of taking the normal necessities that you need, a quilt, a pot holder, a curtain, and like turning it into a beautiful art through the craft. and I think a lot about craft and art in like the opera and in like my opera work and
Mhm.
practice and like taking the day to day and what needs to be done, putting on this story and how do we make it something beautiful and impactful and turn it into art. And like to me, the the clearest pathway has always been to really refine the craft,
Mhm.
and that then you're just like a little stepping stone over to art. Um, but like, you know, my mom and my grandmothers both sewed, and so there's, you know, like dresses and quilts and things that you need to have, and I think we need to have art in our life. And how do we take that from just like something we need into something that fulfills us in a way instead of just like checking a box?
Ah,
Mhm.
nice. I love it. I
That's
love that
beautiful.
concept.
That's beautiful, Francis. I also have a mom who sews, and I'm desperate to glean all of her skills. I just haven't done it like you. So good for you. But I'm totally inspired by my mother, who was a maker of all things. And um, I don't know if you're familiar with The Artist's Way, this wonderful book that is also a process. As you go through the book, you learn about the importance of creating things in this world. And a lot of people are deterred from The Artist's Way because they think it's just for artists, like specifically a painter or a poet or a singer or whatever. But it actually it highlights how all human beings are artists in some way, because we all create
Right.
something.
Yes.
You could be
100%.
an engineer or a woodsman or whatever, who knows? But the act of creating something that wasn't there before is what makes us so specially human. So that's why I do what I do, because I find it thrilling to go from these old little ink blots on paper that were written hundreds of years ago, studying it, learning it in my mind, and then coming together with other people that I've maybe met or maybe not met. And we make this thing that's never been done before and perform it
And will
with.
never happen again.
Yes.
It'll never
Like
happen
even
again.
from the Friday performance to the Sunday
Right.
performance, it's
Right.
different.
It's
Right. So
It's
I love that. And
it's
that's why I make the things that I do, because it's hard. Like, let's be honest, we're gonna get to that. It's hard, but it's worth it for that.
yes. I love it. And as we continue to think of the women in our lives, y'all's lives also include opera. So I'd like to know, is there a particular female character or any character, I'll say, that inspires you? Any character in particular, like, yeah, she's it. That's the one.
Well, speaking of Marriage of Figaro, I love to sing Susanna. She is like totally the center of the wheel of that opera,
Yes.
in my opinion. And I yeah, I just love it. People like to clump her in with all the Ina Anna Eddas, and sometimes the either of the other sopranos know what's going on. Sometimes they don't, but she knows what's going on. She's 4 steps ahead of everyone. So clever. I really don't like it when people use the adjective sassy, because I'm like, what does that even
What
mean?
is,
What,
yeah.
she has opinions? Like, I don't know. I'm not willing to qualify that as sassy, but I guess some people would qualify her that way. But she's clever. She's on the ball, and yet at the same time, really relationships matter a lot to her. She's very sensitive to those things. I think she's a fantastic character, and I would love to sing that role until the day I'm done singing.
I love it. And even in this thing of sassy, is that confident that makes you uncomfortable? What does sassy mean? What do you say?
yes. And
Break that.
everyone applies sassy to so many
Yeah.
characters.
Break it down. What
Like
does that mean?
Yeah, what is it?
right. Like I feel like a sassy maybe applies more towards like an Adina
Uh,
who's like actually going out to cut Nemorino down a little bit. Like she digs at him. Like it's near bully. I don't know. There's
Or
something.
Norina and Pasquale, like she's,
Oh,
you
because
know,
she's got like a trickster element to her.
yeah, and
Yeah,
she's like,
yeah. She's conning.
yeah, I get it. But I mean, let's not qualify all intelligent women as sassy or all
mhm.
confident women as sassy. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's
Is it a combination of confidence and charm that's slightly more aggressive than you what when we break it down, which we can get into all of
Well,
that.
I feel this goes back to what we were talking about before when we reduce these characters to just
Uh-huh.
innocent or just somebody was talking to me, oh, a singer was talking to me about how they kind of struggled with Carmen, especially like during the Segadia, and they were like, well, she's just trying to seduce. I was like, she's not trying. First of all, she's not just anything. She has already seduced him. She has won.
She
She
has
is
one.
she has won the scene. She knows how this is going to play out. I don't think she's trying to do anything. But like when we reduce the characters to one thing,
Uh-huh.
then we try to make the human performer fit into the box of one thing. And I think that's completely unhelpful, because
Ooh,
the
that's
whole point is to bring the real human to the page version of the character, to make it, you know, live in 4K or whatever, and to give it a real life. And when we try to reduce one, we kind of end up reducing the other.
That's
Absolutely.
a word, Francis, because when we reduce the complexity of humanity between the characters as well, we
And
start
I think
to
between the performers, which
between the
is, I
characters,
can go
between
off
the
on a little
performers.
tangent about what we try and do with intimacy. Is like we try and create a rehearsal space where the performers can still be human,
Yes,
and realizing that the characters that they put on and off can affect them in
yes,
some, both
100%.
sometimes negatively and sometimes positively. And so like reducing and reducing, it's never good for anybody.
Yes, yes, not allowing our characters to be human, but then to expect human beings to play inhumane characters. It that extra flow, which I love the ways in which, when we unpack what we're doing in opera, as I say so often, we are putting a hole in the wall or in the ground, wherever we are, standing on top of something, and we are playing pretend is what we are doing. If we play pretend, it comes from our imaginations, which means our humanity has to be present in that work. And that also means that there's enough space for all of our humanity to be present in this work. If we look at Carmen, when we reduce her to just trying to seduce someone, we also take away Don Jose's agency in the decision that he makes, because he can blame everybody else. But player, you're a grown man.
A grown man
Capable of
who's had a
making
history
decisions.
of this sort of thing.
Right.
Like he's not,
Who's
you
capable of
know,
making decisions for yourself. And then we get to kind of dig a bit deeper into what that means between their relationship and how the rest of the story progresses. So I love this. I'll still ask you, Francis, is there a character in particular that kind of continues to like?
an opera character or a non-opera character?
Oh, fun. Let's do opera first and then non-opera.
Okay. An opera character is really weird to think, because because it's so hard to look at women in opera who are in leadership position, like female characters, because they're often like, they don't do well, like Lady Macbeth, not having a great time at the end. I just directed my first Macbeth, and it was like, she's a really cool character. She has a lot going
Mhm.
on. She's calculating but not
Uh-huh.
inhumane.
Uh-huh.
She chooses her moves
Uh-huh.
and thinks about them really. She spends a lot of time thinking about it, but like she doesn't. I mean, it's a tragedy. The
Yes.
heroes aren't supposed to succeed, right? Like it's but yeah, I think Lady Macbeth is a very interesting character.
Okay.
We could have a whole other panel on that.
Okay. We'll take that. And then also the consideration of what it means when we don't have enough of different types of representation, and
Yeah.
whether or not those whom inspire us, right? Those who inspire us, if it's necessary that they are always successful, and what that means, especially if we don't have options.
What is the thing from Star Trek? It's possible to do everything right and still fail.
Yes. Nice. So then that brings my segue outside of opera. Is there a particular character who inspires you?
Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec. We share a birthday.
I'm feeling that.
So there's like part of that. And it's like she's so dedicated and so interested. I mean, she doesn't always do it right, but she's so interested in doing the best for everybody who works around her. And she's so interested in succeeding. I find myself in alignment with that, but also sometimes she's too interested in succeeding. But I appreciate her.
Nice.
I love that. And I think that too, like, so women in leadership, and I also want to see more women friendship, and also more mother-daughter and sister relationships. Like in opera, they're so absent. It's so absent.
Wouldn't you love another scene in Werther with Charlotte and Sophie, like in Act 1? Wouldn't you love like a whole scene with just them?
I mean, talk about relatable, right? I mean, like so many people in the audience are gonna be like, oh, same, like I had that, or I wanted that, or I missed that.
Yeah. Yeah. And they get like one scene, and you have to stuff their whole relationship history into one scene. And it's so
Yeah.
difficult. Meanwhile, Werther gets to sit around being a mopey face for like a whole
So
It gets so long to just be Werther. And
Yes. Oh, I like that. You get so long to just be, and that's
yeah,
not
to
always
explore. You
present.
get so long to play in the Werther brain, and
Mhm.
you get so little. I feel like Charlotte doesn't get a super long time either. And then her time with Sophie is even shorter.
Mhm. Mhm. And when we look at kind of the works that we have in the canon, we do have new works coming, but and I love this plug of, hey, pay attention. Pay attention to who's in the field and where we're headed. But when we look at the canon, so much of it really does come from male perspectives. I recall when I first learned operas, I shared this with you all, that when I first learned operas, I would kind of put them into very short sentences, 3 sentences, just so I could memorize, keep going. How do I break this all down? In that, the Duke is a jerk. Jerk goes after the jester's daughter. She dies. Poets and seamstress fall in love. They're poor. She gets sick. She dies. Most of it was ending with she dies. Of course, that's what we pay attention to in so many ways. But also this expanded consideration of we don't really get a lot of time with some of these characters. I'd like to unpack that a bit more. And Madison, you spoke about this a bit earlier. In your particular opera, that is your fate as a character. Can you talk about what it means to portray that character? Do you have any advice for others who are considering the same part of the work, right? And navigating the same part of the work? Francis, of course, I'll pass it to you as an intimacy character as well. Go for it, Madison.
It's a tricky thing. Especially for my voice type. Again, I'm often going to portray these beautiful, fragile things, and
Mhm.
that's what's been written. And for some reason, those audiences and even audiences now do love to watch these beautiful, fragile things get ruined and destroyed. And that's how a lot of these operas go. I can only speak for myself. I just, like I said before, I'd like to infuse those choices as much as I can. So for Gilda, instead of it being naivete, I think it's bravery. I think she truly believes she's found love with the Duke. And whether or not that's reciprocated, that's the scene that I would add in the opera, a confrontation between those two. It's still bravery on her part. And also, is it bravery because she's trying to save her father's life? He could be the next one to come in and meet Sparafucile. So I make them courageous because that's how I can sleep at night.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in portraying these just ignorant, simple-minded characters. I don't know what was in the mind of all of the composers and
Right.
librettists. We can read the original material and try to grasp what we can, but I won't try to make too many assumptions. I can just control what I can control. So that's the conversation I'm always having with directors and my colleagues when I'm in the room for these rehearsals. And when that's a wonderful give and take, it's a wonderful rehearsal process.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I
And I
enjoy doing.
appreciate that kind of deeper dive. And again, language is very flexible. We have language that means different things, but language also matters. Even to call Gilda naive assumes that she should have known.
Right.
Should she have known if she had been locked away? How?
And the
How?
question is, what exactly was she naive of?
Of yes,
Like,
yes,
was she naive of anybody existing? Like,
yeah.
did Gilda just think that this was like post-apocalyptic? There was no one in the like,
Right.
I mean, we don't know. Like, I'm sure there's a production where they literally live in a bunker or something,
Lovely.
you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. In the ways that we get to consider. Again, this I create worlds and I communicate worlds, the ways that we get to consider what was her world like? Should she have been aware? How can she, was her father, what should she have known in order for that to be considered naive? And yes, the courage of I'll be the one.
Yeah.
I'll be the one to do this because this is what matters to me. We get to see those layers of humanity in so many ways. I'll ask Francis, in the work that you do, what should people consider especially in these types of roles where they can weigh heavy. And like you said, there are other roles that have a positive association, a positive impact. What can we consider, and what would you like for opera companies and artists and audiences to consider when we're programming this type of work?
I hope artists consider that their reaction to carrying these roles may change over time, and to like, as an actor, I'm hoping you live in a world where your reaction can surprise you and lead you to new interesting character choices. But as a performer, I hope you know that your relationship to the character and your relationship to the work of performing that character can shift and evolve, and your needs might change as you perform a character over your career.
And that's
Um,
okay.
and that's, yes,
Yes.
and that's actually, to me, a healthier option than like having a very controlled like, than being secure in your reaction. And I hope companies know that doing this work, especially if we're changing a working on shifting a conversation about a character that is generally just whatever, that it takes a lot of time and effort and resources from everybody to do it. And I hope the audiences remember that they can come in and be surprised too. Like, it's good for them to come in and be surprised and to think about characters in a new way, and that it doesn't affect the version of the character that is closest to their hearts. Like
Mm.
us doing, Rigoletto set in a bunker does not take away the experience of watching Rigoletto with, castles and, wooden benches in the Sparalucile's tavern. And
Mhm.
um, is that experiencing this version doesn't take away from your experience of any other version.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that. And what I am hearing is the beautiful impact of opera to start to provide meaning, right? And opportunities to make meaning of our experiences and how we associate that with our identity in so many ways, which is why we have so many folks who do champion particular works because it reminds them of this time I experienced this and that was meaningful to me. Champion particular productions. This should be set here, and this is what it needs to feel and look like. All of those things. So I love this invitation to explore more about the works we love, about the characters with whom we feel we are familiar, and where we get to go afterwards. Love it. And so, Madison, I'm going to ask you the same thing, as well as any advice you would have for artists as well as opera companies. What should opera companies and artists consider in programming works and how women are represented in these works?
I think if you're having the conversation, if you're mindful of these points, you're on the right path, both in programming and receiving the art. We have the canon that we have. So we have these operas, and they are what they are. But the way that Francis is talking about how to approach them and thinking about these characters can enliven them, can rejuvenate them, can have you going, oh, I never thought about that. Oh, Don Giovanni could actually be kind of conflicted or whatever. You know what I mean? These things that are really tropes, stereotypes, because that's where all of this art came from, were these very stereotypical types of characters. That's great. That's our origin story. We can decide how we move into the future. So I'm all for modern productions, for new contemporary lenses, as long as it serves the story and it serves these characters and it serves the conversation that we're having today. And I also I want to see more and more collaboration in opera, not just, we're in a new day. We're visual audiences. I want to see more art, more projections, more dance. That's what opera always has been a collaboration of art forms.
Yes.
So the more and more that we do that, just this spring, we did a production of The Pearl Fishers at Austin Opera. It was gorgeous. It's a production that's existed, but it was rejuvenated with Austin Dance India, this Indian dance company, local to the city. And I can't tell you how it transformed the story that we told.
Yes.
It's just beautiful. So that's how we have, that's how opera has always been. And that's what I want to see more and more of in the future. And I think that will make all of the characters and the stories just richer and richer.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. And my final questions, I'm going to combine them because I'd love to celebrate you and what this means to celebrate women in this work and in this art form. So I will ask kind of a multifaceted question. First, can you let me know one of the challenges you've overcome in your career? We know what it is like to be women in this very male-dominated art form, in this male-dominant perspective of the art form. That does not mean that we do not have a place. It does not mean things cannot shift. And it does not mean it defines who we are and how we do our work. So I'd love to know how you overcame the challenge, right? The challenge, how you overcame it, and what celebration means to you. How do you celebrate yourself? How do you celebrate others? I'm going to kick that to Frances first and then Madison.
Ooh, overcoming challenges in opera. I feel that that's a real process, and I can't be like, well, we've killed misogyny and it's all done now. Like this is an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing, just like there's always more to explore in these characters. There's always more to explore in how we can make opera more humane for everybody. Yeah, there's I think it's interesting because Madison will have a very different view as this, because
Yes.
there's, Madison is, I hate to say competing for roles, but when Madison is being considered for a job, they're only considering other sopranos,
Right.
and certain types of sopranos. And it's interesting to see in my work who stays in this career.
Oh, yeah.
And who gets hired back places, and you never know why. But it's interesting to see who develops relationships with companies and how those relationships start. And that's something I think about a lot and I'm still trying to figure out. And but oh gosh, what was the second question?
I was going to say, and so how do you celebrate yourself? How do you measure
how do I celebrate
celebration?
myself? I think it's the fact that I can keep finding I celebrate that there's new exciting things to explore in opera. Like I have many books on my bookshelf that I still have to read or want to read in opera. And whenever I'm like, ugh, this career is not going the way I want, I'm like, oh, but there's like this thing I haven't thought about. It's like the political mind in 17th century French opera. What is that all about? Real nerd stuff. And so like that excitement, rekindling that is to me a celebration of what I love about opera and what I love about opera.
Yes. Beautiful. Madison, same. Can you let us know a challenge you've overcome in your career or one you're overcoming now and how you celebrate yourself?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we could probably talk for an hour on this, and I agree with Frances about the ongoing nature of the challenges in this career and in this lifestyle. As a young artist, criticism was so hard for me to learn how to take criticism well, and to realize when a piece of criticism was not helpful and to say, thank you, I respect
Talk about it.
You're trying to do your job.
Like, that is not constructive. That's a you thing, not a me thing.
Exactly.
Goodbye.
And doing that respectfully and tactfully, and recognizing that people are often trying to prove their own worth in employment and in the room. And I say, okay, thank you. And no, thank you. I wish I could go back to myself at 20 and say, okay, here's what we got to do. It took me a long time to learn that, but and I'm still very much in process, but that's been a huge help. Another huge challenge has been motherhood in this career. And I once again, we could have another panel on this. There's a long way to go in just encouraging family life in various forms, but especially motherhood has been physically, mentally, emotionally, the most taxing thing I've ever experienced. And it's been fascinating to hop from company to company in this last year of motherhood. I've been very blessed to have a lot of work, but to see how distinctly and differently different companies treat and respect and care for and encourage people with children.
Yes.
So I will try to be an advocate for that going forward. It's challenging, but so worth it. And he's my celebration. Having a little Franklin that can see his mom working hard and on stage and with sleepless nights and doing all of it, but he's my joy and my celebration, and I'm grateful to be showing him that I'm following my passion.
And
Beautiful.
your personal clacker.
Yes, and my personal
Training him how to clap.
Will be your biggest fan for quite
Aw.
some time.
I hope so.
Lovely. And I love your responses to these questions, because in that I also hear advice for others. The advice to find the why, the realness, if you will, the reality of it sometimes is very challenging. Like you said, Francis, this career is not going the way I want. Madison, you said that it's difficult and it's hard. And sometimes you're catching smoke, as we say, from people who don't want to deal with it themselves. And I hear that beautiful phrase of kind of go back to your why, and to take a space and start to explore and expand a bit more about what opera is and what that means for you. So I will bring us to a close. Any final thoughts in particular?
I just have to say thank you, Quote. These questions were so exciting to talk with both of you about. Like, I was saying this before we started, but when I got these questions the other day, I was like, oh, I have so many thoughts. I have to write them down and like make sure I don't forget anything I want to say. And it was such an ignition of collaboration between us. So thank you for bringing these questions.
Of course, of course.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful to spend time with you all. Women are so often incredible listeners, and I think that's what makes us great leaders. And I want to see more and more of that in opera, and I think we will.
Nice, beautiful. What I love about this is that this is our first conversation, certainly not our last. And so we get to continue the conversation. We get to continue to talk about and fold these ideologies, these truths into the work that we do as we shape the opera field we want to see and that we know we deserve. So I thank both of you so very much for your time, for your wisdom, for your knowledge, for your commitment, for your awesomeness. And I thank the Dallas Opera for supporting this work, for supporting these conversations through the TDO Connections programming, and to all of our Dallas Opera families and all of our viewers for continuing to show up, to learn, and to help us shape a more human-centered approach to operatic storytelling. My name is Quodesia D Johnson. I have been your moderator for this conversation. I look forward to seeing and hearing from you all soon.